I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. We, the curators, acknowledge that Dance Trans Revolution is taking place on the unceded land of Munsee Lenape via infrastructures built through the toil of enslaved Black people. We recognize that settler colonial structures are founded upon the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous, Black, and trans people, and continue to be complicit in this violence. In setting up this exhibition, we pay homage to Indigenous, Black, and Dalit elders past, present, and emerging, especially those of trans and gender descent experience, whose labor has allowed us to do this work. Today, After Party Collective speaks from Mexica Triple Alliance, a place of Nahuatl-speaking Indigenous peoples. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology structures and ways of thinking we use every day. Such equipment and the high-speed internet is also not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant environmental effects and displacement that disproportionately affect Indigenous people and people living in the global South. We invite you to join us in acknowledging all this, as well as the shared responsibility as institutions and peers of our generation, and commit to the process of decolonization and abolition. Thank you, Apex Art. Thank you, Steve, Maya, Ryan, and Elizabeth for being such a good team. And yeah, helping us through the whole year, actually arriving at this exhibition. It was a pleasure previously in 2018 to also work with Apex Art when Shaunak was curating an exhibition with them in Delhi. So it was a great experience. So we always were excited about it. Coming to the exhibition, maybe I'm going to just introduce a little bit of our previous practice, which is that we were formed in 2018-19. We came together in 2018-19. We came together because we considered party as spaces which were affirming our identities, the kind of friendships we want to have, and the kind of solidarities and the people whom we want to build solidarities with, and also it becoming a site where critical conversations can happen through. So that's why we consider party as an important space. We also consider party as an important space because one of the things about nightlife is that the primary people who are occupied or who can be occupied, can be employed within nightlife are queer trans people, because there are no other occupations other than entertainment which actually allow us to earn livelihoods, and which we are going to talk about later as well. So we started with, in 2018, we threw a party called the Queer Futures Potluck Party as a way to celebrate the 1 year of the passing of the decriminalization of Article 377, which criminalized homosexuality, but also at the same time, a trans bill was passed, which was completely violent towards trans people by the government of India in 2018, which is called the Transgender Protection Bill, which is also something that we're going to talk about as we speak about the artists in the show. So it was a party which which had DJs, performances, etc. So one of the other things is that we are also interested in kind of different horizontal intersections of transness, horizontal intersections of queerness, that a trans person is not just a trans person is a person of color or a Black trans person. So when we talk about precarities, who are the people who get the most affected? Because the idea is also that none of us can actually move forward if somebody's left behind. So some of those things in terms of how we work around the people we work with, we recently did an exhibition called Party at the End of Gender Normativity, which was a public art exhibition in Vienna with the VM Walker Festival, where we basically invited 3 trans illustrators from origins from the global South, who collectively came together in this pedagogical model, which we created as a workshop with a speculative fiction writer, Mimi Mondal. And through the workshop, we arrived at these 3 illustrations, which looked at party at the end of gender normativity. We also have been working on a project called Consent of the Governed, which looks at questions around body and constitution and through the subjectivities of kink. So basically our practice is, and we also do, a lot of our curatorial critiques are also through a video practice or a performance practice versus just like a curatorial note. So those are just things that we kind of experiment with our practices. And yeah, and now we arrive at Dance Trans Revolution. Maybe Shaunak can share that.
So this show that we have up right now at Apex really looks at the kind of thesis that is at the core of our explorations, really reflecting upon the party as a site for critical praxis with and through the works of artists and organizers from different heritages of the global South. The artists in the show are all very engaged with this question of throwing parties, the mechanisms and modes of throwing parties, the histories of the space, and how they can take us forward. Yeah, as we've put the show together, we've seen that it kind of reflects the spatialities, rhythms, and choreographies of this space, looking at the power of trans-led gatherings for and by trans people as a space that allows us the agency to think of our own futures. Because this is not a space that we are afforded in many other institutional spaces, whether it's the museum, whether it's the gallery, whether it is the pedagogical space, whether it is the archive. We're not necessarily afforded the right to tell our own stories and make our own ways forward. And so that's what we really look at. How can we orchestrate ways of gathering, ways of community that fulfill the needs of trans, intersex, and gender deviant people. Yes, that's a little bit about our motivation to bring the show together. Perhaps we can start the tour and we'll talk about each of the works and how they came together to bring this together to, yeah. So welcome to the space. For those of you who are not able to make it in New York, when you enter the space, you actually have a soundtrack that is playing within the space, and entering through these, we can hear a little bit from the middle. Yeah, this is the kind of soundtrack that takes over your auditory sense as you enter the space. And maybe we'll start talking about the video that is by Lomas Beo and Wilfredo. Just a little bit before we actually start playing the video, this video was actually one of the videos that is core to thinking about the concept for the exhibition. Will and Lomas Beo, Wilfredo is an artist of Afro-Caribbean descent, now living in Berlin. And Wilfredo met Lomas Beo while they were on residency in Bogota. Lomas Beo is a performer, singer, songwriter, and activist in Bogota. And they came together to form this video piece in 2019-20, and we saw it actually in the peak of early days of the pandemic. And this video was one of the cores to thinking about the themes of the show and really set us on track of that thought. So perhaps we can play the video now and then we'll talk a little more about how it relates to the other works.
Queer Black Bitch Killer. Melanina que mata más que la guerrilla. Esta bala no esquivas. Maniquí se vitrina, el estilo que siempre aniquila. Diva negra marica, a los machos ponemos en la fila.
Escucha, Mara. Queer, black, bitch, killer, queer, black, bitch, killer. Melanina que mata más que la guerrilla, esta bala no esquiva. Queer, black, bitch, killer, queer, black, bitch, killer. Maniquí sin vitrina, el estilo que siempre aniquila. Queer, black, bitch, killer, queer, black, bitch, killer. Diva negra marica, a los machos ponemos en la fila. Queer, black, bitch, killer, queer, black, bitch, killer, queer, black, bitch, killer. Mis ancestras en mi cuerpo, Wakanda, bitch, pantera. Estampados y colores, camuflada en estas telas. Pa' enseñarle a estas bitches quién comanda en esta fuerza. Esos dardos no me llevan, apuntan hablando mierda. Entendelo y si te altera, mejor tira pa' otra acera. En un mundo falso, pocas pueden ser certeras. Bitch, I'm a fashion killer, mi visaje es nueva era. Rompí todas sus cadenas, me las trepé como joyera. Los beats, los bantus, las tropas o las trenzas. Así vi el camino, encontré oro en la caleta. Aceite de coco que la traya.
Shaunak, you're muted. You might want to just unmute yourself quickly.
I'm just unmuting myself. Ooh, Zoom issues. So we have this video coming through right at the beginning of the exhibition space and also at the beginning of this curatorial tour, because it really lays the foundation for a lot of the other lineages and histories that we consider within the show, and that are really important to party spaces across the board, whether or not they are known. And really that is part of a big part of the point that Will and Lomas Bayo make, is this consideration of party spaces, of drum and beat, of techno, of and the way that these music forms of cumbia, the way that these music forms come from the cultures of enslaved Black people who come to the American continent, who are brought to the American continent, and the way that they bring in their drum cultures, the way that they form spaces of musically led gathering. And these then develop into what we know as Detroit techno, as drum and bass, as a lot of the histories that then get appropriated on dance floors without the acknowledgement of the histories and the violent histories from where they emerge. And it's really exciting because Will and Lomas Bayo, they present this dense text that uses a lot of historical references as well as contemporary philosophical references to Black writers, but really embody it through a lot of, especially Lomas Bayo's songs that kind of form interjunctions in this 40-minute video. And you see the gray exercise ball that forms one of the core motifs within the video and within the space that they are shooting, then come into this activation space of the exhibition. And so it's really through this mode of acknowledging appropriations and acknowledging the histories, especially acknowledging the fact that those who make this music do not get material retribution, do not get acknowledgement, often do not get employment in the spaces where this history and culture is then utilized to make profit. And that kind of sets this at the beginning of our of this reflection on what it means to gather and what it means to have spaces that acknowledge and lend themselves to these histories. We are also muted.
Yeah, sorry. I think after Will and Lomas's, I want to speak a little bit about Jasmine Infinity and TYGAPAW, Dion McKenzie. Just like why interest in nightlife or why interest in party, one of the things that party spaces have also is that people who are trans, who are Black, who are queer have taken up some kind of space and kind of organizing for themselves and their own peers and their own community, which is something. And also like a lot of these things, like if you look at ballroom, that also comes not just as a desire for having just a community space where we can be safe and hang out together, which is where it starts from, like from the initial slaves who would be trans folks, but maybe the language around it was not so colonized that everybody's being called trans. You know, you'd be called cross-dresser, transvestite, transsexual. So all of these things have been used historically, but all of these people have come together to create a safe space for people like themselves. Yeah, so similarly, Jasmine Infinity is somebody who grew up in the Bronx. Jasmine Infinity is coming from, was a member of the House of Infinity, and later the mother of the House of Infinity in Oakland chapter of House of Infinity. Jasmine Infinity is a self-proclaimed queen of hell. And Jasmine says that her music is about taking hell and having fun with it. And yeah, so she also similarly talks about the Black trans experience, the Black trans woman experience as an experience of hell. So, so a lot of that work is coming from those experiences, also just kind of continued violence within in fact, in Bushwick and Brooklyn and those kind of sites, even in present day, which has happened physically to some of the artists here. Jasmine, in fact, also is, so Jasmine not only kind of presents her own work, Jasmine also creates a community, creates a label called the New World Disorder, which is primarily for trans Black people of color, producers and artists. And yeah, so you also see that since as trans people, we understand that there is an occupation fixation around the world, that the only thing we can do is be begging or do sex work, because we have also been, moved out of the society, we're thrown out of the society, and these are the two occupations that we can do. But some of the trans folks are organizing that a community can also have livelihood through these other means of employment and occupations. So that's some of the work of Jasmine Infinity. Jasmine Infinity is one of the craziest hellraisers in the Black techno scene of New York. And yeah, and so in this particular show, she actually brings in a lot of her original productions, like tracks, which have not been published on other labels, or they are like too much or too dark or whatever for like other labels to be produced. So these are all new new tracks which Jasmine has put out for this particular show. In relation, we look at the Jamaica-born Dion McKenzie, who was popularly known as TYGAPAW in the nightlife scene, who's also a DJ and a music producer and an artist. So TYGAPAW moved to New York in 2000s, and TYGAPAW is used to throw this party called Fake Accent, which was for queer trans people of color. So yeah, I mean, TYGAPAW, again, like all, and not just two of them, but people like Ant Puke and Polycakes, they're also organizing for trans community and people of color. And I think what this kind of organizing within nightlife also shows us that not all sites, not all clubs, which are primarily white cis het clubs, and that's the culture that they promote, and that's the culture a lot of electronic music promotes, because all the DJs, like literally UK and Germany, think that they are the one who made techno, which is totally crazy. But I feel that some of this kind of collectivizing and organizing within the music industry by trans people, for trans people, by people of color, by Black people, for people of color, and Black people, is kind of asserting that some of the roots to all of this that you're commercializing upon actually belong to us and our community. And yeah, so here TYGAPAW has their paintings. They are techno tubbies. Can we listen to an excerpt from the sound piece?
I'm going to share a few scenes from my own life, mixed in with the ways that race and gender have historically and currently intersected to shape the lives of Black trans people. Ready? Scene 1. I am at home with myself. My body, a sovereign country. Sovereign meaning it is superlative in quality, of the most exalted kind, having generalized curative powers of an unqualified nature, unmitigated, paramount, possessed of supreme power, unlimited in extent, absolute, enjoying autonomy, independent, royal. My body defies the restrictions of a society consumed by boxes and binaries, and are you a boy or a girl? Independent of such conventions, my body clings instead to the long ago lore that understood its magic. I contain multitudes. From this supreme power to name myself.
So this is a text and a lecture by Dr. D.L. Stewart called The Scenes from Black Trans Life, which has been translated into a techno album by Dion McKenzie under the name An Ode to Black Trans Lives. It was made last year during the Black Lives Matter protest. And yeah, so I'm also going to show you a little bit of the protest, images, posters. The first one that you see there is the trans doll. And then it's Dion also does this sort of this particular, the bigger one is called the Meet Us on the Dance Floor Before the World Ends. So it's then the other ones are basically talking about the genres, and the third one says, which is a self-portrait. Ryan, can you zoom into the self-portrait, which is closer to the sound piece? On your right. Yeah, anyway, that's a self-portrait which just says still alive. Yeah, so I mean, so some of those, yeah, maybe Shaunak wants to talk more about some other artists now.
We're very, thanks, V. We're very, excited about these paintings because this is the first time that Dion is showing their painting work. Dion is known internationally for their amazing techno mixes and their techno opera. This is the first time they're showing their painting work, and we're very, we feel very happy to be part of that process. These were all made during the pandemic in 2020. And really, like, the thinking about to some of the titles, Meet Us on the Dance Floor Before the World Ends, is really this call to gathering, and this call to community. And this also comes through in the audio work, this kind of assertion of a call to protect and platform Black trans lives, through which a lot of this culture comes. there's a quote that I'm going to read out by D.L. Stewart that comes in one of the tracks. It's called so I quote D.L. Stewart, "There's a park across the street, but there's a wrought iron fence that encloses this park. This is where the girls and I play. Mostly, I stand at the fence and watch as my fellows play ball in the street and be loud and be rough and be sweaty, and I am behind a fence." And we see this question of exclusion really across many of the works and lives of trans people. And we might even say that the history of transness can be a history of exclusion and therefore resilience through clandestine community. We see this among finding kinship in living rooms, makeshift ballrooms, anonymous chat servers, jatras, parks, piers, buffet flats. And if you move on to Linnea's work, we kind of see a manifestation of embedded within this work is a history of digitality and technology as being one of the spaces where trans people found safety behind a screen, often in chat servers, often on social media websites is where young trans and queer people find ways to think about their identity and find community. But Linnea, who is an art director, 3D art director and visual artist based in Boston, Linnea reminds us that when the digital and the physical world meet, that a lot of questions of transphobia return, a lot of fears of violence, a lot of fears of exclusion then return, and that these are not absent. In fact, a lot of the biases of the physical world therefore manifest into the digital world, which can sometimes be a haven, but can sometimes then turn into a violent and fearful space as well. But Linnea is reclaiming these spaces in her own way. Seventh Girl, a.k.a. Linnea, will watch an excerpt from Seventh Girl's video wall.
I'm ready to tee the fuck up, get drunk as hell. You know, I'm giving the girls work bait today. I'm giving the guys professional.
That's purr.
It's like, you know, I'm giving the guys.
It's the booty for me.
Can we skip ahead a few minutes and look at another part?
Into the thick of it. Into the thick of it.
Thanks, Ryan. So Linnea creates these videos from her avatars in video games Second Life and The Sims. And she says she spends a lot of time involved in making these worlds and making these characters as reflections of how she would like to ideally be in the world, and kind of moving through these locations where she doesn't necessarily have mobility to be at or have the resources to travel to. We're really imprinting these digital locations then with the moves of Vogue, with the spins and the dips that come from the history of Vogue, and imprinting these locations to kind of to assert the ideal space that they would like to then work through. And this kind of also speaks a lot to the way that ballroom and voguing cultures have traveled throughout the world, but the creators, the Black trans women in New York, in New Jersey, in Washington, DC, have not been able to necessarily have themselves travel or have been remunerated for this culture that then gets appropriated. Ballroom today stands at some kind of a peak of global exposure due to a lot of TV shows exposing this culture to global audiences. But it necessarily doesn't translate into mobility and material returns for everyone or for most Black trans communities. Vogue continues to be, ballrooms continue to be a protected space, and they should remain so. And that is really important, that the communities who started them are able to still control the spaces where these happen. So we can move on to Habibich, who is one of the proponents of this kind of global spread of the ballroom and voguing scene, spreading from Harlem across the United States into Canada, Mexico, but also then moving across the Atlantic into Europe and far beyond it. So we have Habibich, who is of Algerian descent, who now lives and works in Paris. Habibich is an amazing voguer, choreographer, dancer, but also an exceptional pedagogue and activist through their performance lecture, Decolonize the Dance Floor. Why don't we have a look at a bit of their video? So Habibit really posits these very important questions and reminders, really, that bodies on the dance floor inhabit these multiple intersections, especially of race, of gender socialization, of ethnicity and class and ability, that make up the ability to occupy space, that make up the ability to feel affirmed, that feel safer on the dance floor. And it's so important to remember that even within the trans community, we all face different kinds of histories, and we've all come from different kinds of struggles, and that it is really important to acknowledge these systemic differences, and even within the trans community, for those who get to be in leadership positions, those who get to be in decision-making positions, to come from multiple intersections of privilege, of oppression, and not be occupied by those who come from spaces of privilege to others relative to others in the community. It's also been an interesting challenge for us to think about the way that we bring in ballroom into this show, which is set in the space in New York, where ballroom was really energized and found strong roots to grow from, and has also been shown and talked about and reflected upon a lot within the city. And so it became important for us to then think about what are the other nuances of ballroom, what are the other spaces in which it is moving, whether it is the digital space, whether it is the international space, what is the current way that ballroom is evolving, and what are the challenges that then come up within this movement and evolution of this form. I think if we can close Habibit's video, we move on to another iteration of circulation of the ballroom scene through Benjira and the House of Slay, who is going to talk us through this.
I think I also want to just sort of talk about it without the sound of the video. Ryan, could you play the video, please? Yeah. Skip like 10 minutes. Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. Yeah, I think this is fine. So what is happening here, like, so Benjira, Benjira actually is of Filipino descent. She is the daughter of Courtney Tupanga Balenciaga and Leomi McDonaldo. And what Benji does is that, so Benji learns and becomes a part of the ballroom community in New York, and then eventually goes back to where she grew up, which is the Gadigal land of Sydney. And there she becomes the first, the mother of the first house of ballroom called the House of Slay. And also kind of organizes these large balls, and a lot of her daughters have gone forward and created the other houses which exist right now in Sydney. One of the other things, I think, when the ballroom scene is being kind of dislocated from Harlem, from New York, and the thing with New York ballroom scene is it is still exclusive to Black trans people, while all of these other ballroom scenes are kind of including other sort of other intersectional marginalizations as well. So in Sydney, they in fact have a category which is only for Indigenous people, and only for First Nations people. And yeah, so that's not something that we consider maybe in the ballroom scene in New York, but that as a intersection is important and is already considered in culture in Australia. So what Benji does is that this is like how Shaunak mentioned, that all of these works actually are being made during the pandemic. And so this actually was a video which was brought about with the ballroom house, the House of Slay of and they put together this thing. It's called Immortal Memories. So Immortal Memories looks obviously at some of these monumental moments within the trans community as passing and but at the same time also considers simple movements, simple like everyday things as important memories and important things for us to consider as trans people and within trans lives. So it's not always about the event, but it's also about the everyday. Yeah, so this is, can we hear some of this and maybe go a little forward? This is Raquel Willis, who's actually a trans activist based in New York. This is actually a event that is happening at the Dirty Habit, which actually is a house which has been home to a lot of like trans folks. This is a house based in the kind of main city in Sydney, and it has housed a lot of trans folks, indigenous folks, people of color, and it continues to do so. In fact, I've also lived there in an RV in that house because it is a place where they understand the precarities one is going through as trans folks and people of color. And in a lot of these videos, we'll also see that we see videos which are of a memorial protest that happens for Melody Bruno, who was killed by the police in Sydney, in New South Wales. And also there are, so Raquel Willis, whose interview that we were looking at is also been interviewed by one of the members of the House of Slay. And as you see the video, so it's an 80-minute runtime. Here it's like this conversation between the elders and the young. There's going to be a little zoom out where you'll see the members of the House of Slay, the people who live in Dirty Habit, and some other elders who've been invited from the community, because this is passing on of intergenerational experiences and how does one survive. The pink RV that you see in the background is where I used to live. And yeah, so I think it's like an 80-minute thing which looks at some of these interview sessions. It looks at some archival content of Sissy Ball, which is one of the balls that the House of Slay organizes. This is the home where people, and a lot of people, it's really interesting because this has also been the home where a lot of people have transitioned. And also transition not only by arriving into the city, but also in terms of being affirmed for their sexuality and gender. We'll also see that later in the video, Benji also talks to TV sisters, and TV sisters give you a history who are indigenous folks. They also give you history of like who was the first trans sister in the community, and then what that sort of that how the first trans sister, because by becoming visible, creates space for the future trans folks. So you'll see a lot of these different things that happen here. There are 2 videos. Maybe we can go back to the exhibition now. There are 2 videos. Yeah, there are 2 videos which have been kind of highlighted in some way. The one video is of the TV sisters. They are doing the TV sister dance there right now in that still image. And that's a video of the members of the House of Slay and basically friends just hanging out in a public space. In this, I mean, another thing about Sydney, which I really like, and a lot of kind of queer, a lot of queer, not a lot of them. I mean, for me, one of the things which was really affirmative about a beach site within Sydney was that even trans bodies could be like, naked. and it was not like, if you are not considered disabled or out of place, but you are just kind of present in that full nudity, which is not something that we actually see even at the kind of nude beaches or the queer gay beaches around the world. So I think, yeah, something that Dirty Habit, by like coming together, and House of Slay and some of these things have created in Sydney is a really strong, obviously it comes also from the homo nationalism policies of Australia to kind of allow for some of these things to happen. But at the same time, I think it's one of the greatest communities in terms of trans communities that I have participated in. And I think, yeah, so I think it's also to highlight some of those intersections. The video also, like we said, that video also takes from, video also illustrates a lot of other histories of trans activism, like from the past and present in terms of the people they engage with. I want to also come now to, in terms of talking to elders, in terms of looking back at elders' work, I want to go to Grace Banu's work. Grace Banu is a Dalit trans rights activist based in Chennai, in India. Great. So when we were talking about the Trans Rights Protections of Act 2019, yeah, 2019, and how, I have to backtrack a little bit because you'll see that in all conversations around trans rights in India. So in 2014, the Supreme Court had passed the Nalsa judgment. And that is a very affirmative judgment because it also asks for reservation and recognition of trans people through different horizontal reservations. It not only proposes that you can be a trans person, it also proposes kind of, it also gives you different rights of livelihood and work and education. But what happens in 2019 is that there is a judgment, there is an act which is passed called the Transgender Rights Protection Act, which does not address any of those things. And in fact, in terms of recognition of even being a trans person, there is a kind of required proof of biological transition. And so a lot of work has been done by trans activists and lawyers towards kind of giving feedback to the act that how do we include intersex people? How do we include non-binary people? What does it mean that when there is a committee who's going to judge your like body, and like that you have to prove that you have had sex affirmation surgery through these kind of like bureaucratic systems. And Grace Banu is one of the petitioners against the Union of India to say that this act does not actually, like, it's not actually something that is allowing us to have all human rights. So Grace Banu, so that as being one of the works of Grace Banu, this is another work where Grace Banu creates, kind of convinced the government to, we can go a little close. We can show a group as well. We can, yeah, I want to show the people and then the colony. Can we go to a little closer? Yeah, so this is a cooperative society called Sandeep Nagar. What Grace Banu does is that Grace Banu identifies, along with the administrative officers, that what is the possible way to create housing as well as a source of employment to a certain group of people. And so like a model of a cooperative society is what the government identifies as a way to be able to create that. So this is in the southern state of India, in Tamil Nadu. And basically it's like a lot of poverty. It's Dalit folks who are primarily again employed with begging. So in the morning you go out begging, you come back home, you change to go out for sex work, and that's primarily what their lives have been. And they wanted to, so Grace what then provides this kind of works with the administration, and after 7 years of work they are able to kind of set up this cooperative society where they set up 30 homes. So 30 folks from the village then are given land rights. They are given they are given these homes, and at the same time they also create a milk kind of a dairy business on the side, if you see in the picture at the bottom. So then that now they're also created, they've not just only provided land rights and housing, but they've also provided means of livelihood. Though still what remains as a thing here is that because of the stigma within the society of trans people, it is like some government body who comes and collects the milk to then go put it out. It is not the trans people who are going and selling this milk, because the stigma continues to exist. So then you are only safe within this kind of boundaries of the cooperative society. And those are the members who have not been given housing also kind of just share housing with other groups of people, with other kind of homeowners within this housing space, and have moved out of the village. So I think it's really interesting that if you see in trans organizing, this idea of creating opportunity of work, which becomes really important, because a lot of trans folks are not able to even get the kind of have basic education where you're able to do things like, in fact, we've also met trans folks who have worked with people with the UN and stuff, but at that time they are still not presenting themselves as trans folks, but kind of presenting themselves in their in the socialized gender, which how everybody understands them. And it's also really interesting to see that how some of these histories, depending on how constitutional rights have been given to people, have existed or have had a community. Like in Mexico City, we had done an event at Club Rochelle, which is kind of hosted by two trans women, and Rochelle, who was one of the first trans right activists, and how within and it's a club which has been running for 17 years. And here the people who identify as transvistas, cross-dressers, and not just trans folks. And yeah, so it's really interesting to see some of these different ways different communities exist, but at the same time, everybody kind of exists at the margins of getting any kind of human rights. So in the video that maybe we can see a little bit of the interview. Hi, Grace.
Hi.
Should we skip ahead a little bit?
Yeah. So can we go
through that? Why we choose that cattle farm is, the cattle farm, when we produce the milk, we directly sell the milk to the government. So he creates that kind of platform. Government's having daily dairy project, and the daily dairy department is separately there. So the department having separate minister. So through that, we get some support from the government, and we are the first transgender milk producer cooperative society we formed. So that's amazing. It's all our dream. Suddenly, after 7 years of struggle, suddenly your dream come true. It's like mesmerizing. That kind of moment. So I'm like, oh, that's great, we did. So when when slowly that construction, the housing construction is going, when we saw that kind of construction, oh, this construction is going on. This side, the livelihood project is going on. Wow. So that's giving so much of encourage to our team. Our team, this is a past experience for us. We don't know safe and secure environment because and I have to mention one specific thing. The police cops, every day police cops will visit 4 times to the area because the surrounding people are uh, uh, every day we are facing different kind of discrimination in the civil society. So they have to protect from those kind of discrimination. So they are coming, carrying, okay, today you are having any issues or anything is happened. They are so that kind of carrying and the protection is happening, giving from the district administrative. So that is also a great thing. So
one of the other things when we were talking about, and I think it's also really interesting when we say that about creating spaces which are trans-led for trans folks, because when you see the representation, our representation within media, you're going to see that they only want us to be crying in front of people. And I think the idea is to also look at communities and celebration. So you'll see, I mean, I don't want to show everything in this particular installation, but the installation tries to kind of show some of that. And I think when we were talking about the horizontal, the idea of so currently what Grace has been currently really pushing is horizontal reservation. So the NALSA judgment, which was 2014 judgment, kind of proposed for reservation for trans folks, but it didn't get adopted by all of the states. And Karnataka is one of the states which actually created 1% reservation for trans folks. But what the Tamil Nadu government, which is where Grace is primarily active, is proposed that we are going to put them under the other backward caste category. So India has primarily caste-based reservation post-independence as a way of affirmative action for communities who haven't had the same kind of resources. And other backward caste is one of the categories. But there are other categories and other people who are more precarious than the other backward caste, which are called the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes. So people who are Dalit people come within scheduled castes. And when we look at the intersection that Grace works at is as Dalit, Muslim, trans, and what Grace and there is, in fact, Grace faces casteism even with other upper caste trans people. And so what that means is that if you give reservation as, say, trans folks gets 2% reservation under other backward caste category, what that vertical reservation is proposing is that if you're a trans Dalit person, you are still within the OBC category and that you cannot apply within the scheduled caste category. Or if you apply within the scheduled caste category, then you're not a trans person. So horizontal reservation means that as a Dalit trans person, I should be allowed to apply benefit out of my Dalitness, of me being Dalit under the scheduled caste category, and of me being a trans person under the reservation for trans people. So yeah, we are seeking for horizontal reservation, and that's why as trans folks, we also seek for communities and which are led by trans folks because they understand these different things that affect us rather than being represented by a lot of other cis women's and other sort of feminists and leftists. Shaunak.
Yeah, I think that's so important to think about this idea of being led by folks who understand and come from different intersections, and it shows in these works the different kind of kinship networks, the different kinds of support networks that then can be imagined and created in the gatherings that are led and created by folks, by trans folks who have lived experiences of multiple oppressions. Last work here that we have is by Jonathan Eden. Jonathan is a illustrator living in Seattle of South African heritage. And this work actually came out during our project Party at the End of Gender Normativity, which was a really exciting process for us, and is something that we hope to continue, is to think about this idea of affirmation within peer pedagogical spaces, and the way that we can have continued and for periods of time sustained interactions and collective imaginations happening with trans people, trans artists from different parts of the world. Within this illustration that Jonathan has made, Jonathan imagines from his own lived experience as a chronically ill, as a person, a neurodivergent person suffering from chronic fatigue. Jonathan imagines the space of the party as one which has and centers the opportunity also for rest, for sleep, for access, intimacy of different kinds of physical, mental, and sociological disabilities. And at the same time, Jonathan pushes us into this kind of liminal imaginative space of the future, where we're imagining sort of multifaceted bodies engaging together in friendship, in intimacy, in co-presence, that doesn't require everybody to be active within it in the same way, that we are able to have kinships then through acknowledgement of these different abilities of our bodies, acknowledging the importance of different kinds of communication, of different kinds of food, of presences that are glitchy, that are ghosty, that are monstrous, and the affirmation and acceptance and celebration of these different kinds of modes of being. And Jonathan, through this work, also pushes us to really think about access within our nightlife spaces. And this is something that we hope that can really hold us accountable to think of who is able to access these spaces of gathering, these spaces of collectivity, and how can then we increase that net of people who can then find solidarity, who can find moments of collectivizing through spaces that we organize. So Jonathan leaves us with this moment of thinking of 100 years in the future, and how is it that we reach these levels of access intimacy?
Amazing. Thank you so much, you guys. This has been such a wonderful, it's been so wonderful to hear you talk so in depth about these works. You know, I've been here at the space and really gotten a chance to absorb all of the sounds and the colors and the lights and the space itself over this last month, which has been so wonderful. But it was great to sort of really dig into some of the works and get some of the in-depth, you know, backstories And thank you for sort of leading us through such a unique arc and bringing us to that beautiful last thought there with Jonathan's work. I know that you guys wanted to speak a little bit about the design of the space itself, which I think is really unique. And I think, for sure, like you said, when you come into the space, you've got the Jasmine Infinity's work playing. So it's really, and you chose to really kind of dim the lights and go with, have some kind of party feel. So I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of overall curatorial installation and design of the space.
I think also before we do that, we have a shout out to Mitsuka Berry, who's designed our amazing posters and the cover of the brochure. Mitsuka has a show in Boston, which is looking fab. And so we're very excited to have their work also kind of adorning the space and shouting out to taking this, as the face of this exhibition, the design as the face of this exhibition. Vi, you want to talk about the design a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I think as Shaunak had earlier mentioned, trying to introduce the exhibition about the idea of rhythms and kind of choreography. I also want to talk about disorientation, but at the same time, I want to also, so I think, Ryan, if you stay there, something I want to point out is that as you enter the space, obviously you are entering through this kind of, it's usually a lot of bar space, like a club space that you have these, no. Something. So obviously the first thing that we have is the Mitsuka's poster, which is something that you can see from the entrance as well. They have, there are multiple ways why certain aesthetics come into being, but for us, it was also looking at just like the nightlife culture of kind of pasting multiple posters as a way to kind of share an event, and not necessarily just highlighting as a singular poster. If you also turn around a little bit towards the land acknowledgement, there's a land acknowledgement which is written, we wrote that on the walls. So something that was important for us is to kind of, I think that's fine. We can go back to where you were before. Something that you're going to notice, which is also something that you noticed when Ryan was taking us around, is that you'll see that the screens are reflecting on each other. And so how the whole screen bounces is that Benjira's with larger screen bounces to the smaller screen of Benjira, which bounces to Habibich's video work, and which bounces to Linea's video work. So within all these video frames as well, you can see each other have this kind of a conversation, like where you are not able to if you are looking at, maybe we can go to Habibich as well. Oh, yeah, let's just see Habibich from the front, and you're going to notice, you can see Linea basically voguing simultaneously, like just in parallel to Habibich. No, in front, you had a shot in front also. Yeah, like that. Yeah, so use that, and that's the Linea video, right? And at some point, if you go actually, if you look at, can you go back to the wall? No. Yeah. A little back if we can. But anyway, when you go a little back, you are going to see the Benjira video being projected into Habibich's video. So I think some of these things, even though we just look at that, oh, these are all video works and therefore installed on these TVs and therefore, but I feel these kind of intersections that are also just aesthetic and visual intersections are kind of orienting one work to the other. The disorientation then has to do with how you break the kind of formal structure of the architecture, which is what we try to do by creating this sort of just running the green sort of, what do you call it? A green pathway across, what is it called?
The runway.
Yeah, they're basically make the runway run diagonal across the exhibition space, which really breaks how the exhibition space is and also kind of informs the length of the exhibition. And I think it was one of the first things that we installed, and it immediately changed the space of how So, I mean, so some of those things, and also just like not taking necessarily from what are the traditional forms of white wall installation, but kind of breaking those structures a bit. Also, obviously, being informed by nightlife, and therefore not necessarily only using yellow lighting, but kind of introducing the colored light, which actually also takes up from Mitsuka's poster. So we have pink, purple, and green, which are primarily continuously kind of happening in the space. We also kind of introduce some elements from video works like we do for Villain Loma's Bill, where you kind of it's also this kind of breaking. It's like the fourth wall breaking where you're not sure, like, oh, I'm actually sitting in one of this and they are also sitting in one of this, right? So what does that mean for you to experience that in the video breaking? At the same time, you have this DJ booth, which is a way, like, you know, a lot of times soundscapes exist. If somebody has to do a soundscape in the exhibition space, then they'll just have speakers and the sound is going to be on the speakers. But I feel that it's about also holding space and for a work and for a particular person in the space. Then we also try to organize some kind of curatorial kind of breaking of the exhibition. Maybe Shaunak wants to talk about that.
I think the idea, somebody was asking us about how the party comes into what we see as the difference between the party and the exhibition space. And it's been really fun to play with bringing in some of the elements of different kind of party spaces, but then transforming them into transforming them as a way to subvert the traditional exhibition space. Like the green runway that you see, the idea of the runway comes from a ballroom, and this idea of performing on the runway, walking in categories on the runway, walking through those categories. The DJ booth is this affirmation of the way that trans DJs really affirm a party space and what it means then to have that kind of experience leading the party. What's also been really exciting for us is that a lot of the materials that we use in the exhibition space are actually materials that we found during our time in New York. Shout out to Materials for the Arts and Alison Kuo for introducing us to them. So the green material, the material at the entrance, they're all materials that we have found and then repurposed for this exhibition. So also thinking about how this kind of this kind of DIY culture that often exists within a community-led gathering spaces, how do we bring in some of that spirit into our making of the show? Thinking also of spaces that those who recognize and feel comfortable within party spaces, how can we bring in, continue that emotional response to being in the space and feeling a kind of continuity of that familiarity to those spaces, while that might actually disorient somebody who is expecting a certain kind of formalized aesthetic. So it is this juxtaposition of who does a space feel familiar to versus who does it then confuse and put into a different state of embodied being there.
I think a lot of text, because the exhibition is also very text heavy. A lot of text actually seems familiar to a lot of us because we have these conversations constantly, while for other audiences who just are primarily maybe art audiences, it becomes like a kind of a theoretic engagement or like something to study or learn. But like, it's really interesting that when actually there have been Black folks or trans folks in the space and queer folks in the space, they know exactly what it is. Like, and they know exactly what's going on. And they're also excited that the gallery structure has been broken in that way. Yeah, I think even, and yeah, anyway, it's really interesting because when we were thinking of installation also, like okay, we would look at that some works are in the end versus some works are in the front, but I feel that that doesn't happen because you are able to actually see the works as you enter at the same time. Yeah.
Thank you guys. I know I want to keep talking to you for ages and get more in depth. There's like, you know, when you were talking, Vidisha, about like all of the legislative you know, stuff that's so fascinating to me. But unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of our time right now. So we're going to wrap it up. But I just want to encourage everybody to go to the website. In the chat there are some links that go directly to the page on our website that is the exhibition page. And there's not only the 3D tour that you can spend some time on your own, navigating around the way that Ryan was, but you can also click on the videos and watch the full videos there. And there's also a really wonderful essay written by After Party Collective that you can access there. This also has been recorded today, and so this video is going to go up on the website. So please share with your friends and come back and watch it again. So just before we go, I know Vidisha, you wanna just add one additional thing, and then we're gonna wrap it up here. But I want to just thank you guys so much for this beautiful show and for really digging into the wonderful artists that are participating and some of this incredible work that they're doing in the world on behalf of the trans communities that they're all a part of. So I'll turn last word to you, Vidisha, as we wrap up.
Sorry, I need 5 minutes. One of the things that I really want to say is that, like we said, that a lot of this work has been made during the pandemic. There are different things that we all have collectively experienced during the pandemic, but at the same time, trans people have been affected way more than a lot of other folks, and obviously, especially Black trans people. And I also want to share that what Jasmine says, hell, and the Black trans experience, hell also is a mental health experience, which is actually most of the work or most of people's organizing is coming from what that space as well of kind of disproportionate effect on our mental health and disproportionate effect on different kind of white cis het industrial complexes. And in terms of Grace Banu as well, like Grace was when younger as a Dalit person was not allowed to sit in a classroom, was asked to sit under a tree, then eventually by the parents sent to mental asylum. But it's really interesting because what Grace does at the mental asylum is gets access to works of Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar, who is the anti-caste polymath of India, who maybe one should reference actually. And in fact, one of our trans friends also says that as a trans person, you should read Dr. Ambedkar before you read Butler. So I think it's really important to take care of each other and also understand that it's not only about opportunity, education, but it is also about everyday survival and how we do that. And also everyday celebration. And to kind of let us have space for that. And thank you so much to everyone who's been here today and for holding space for us. And we are happy to also like respond to your questions on like our Instagram, through our Instagram. And I mean, if you're in Mexico City, which I don't know, happy to party with you. And thank you so much for holding space for us.
Thank you both, and enjoy the rest of the day. And thank you everyone for being here. We'll see you in another space, either virtual or real, soon enough. Okay. Bye everyone.